Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Bellino. I'm really excited to be here to share some of the work that I've been doing with young people in Kakuma refugee camp. Thank you for inviting me to share some of this work at the International Symposium on Democracy, Global Citizenship, and Transformative Education. I'm really excited to be in such good company with you all. So I want to start with a little bit of context for where this work takes place. So the light blue state here is Kenya, and the yellow states surrounding Kenya are the countries of origin of the majority of young people who have sought asylum in Kenya. Many of these refugees living in Kenya are hosted in camps. This work takes place in Kakuma refugee camp in northwestern Kenya along the border with South Sudan. And there's a very large youth population here. And it's important to note that although there's great debate about how to measure the average time of exile, for most of these young people, they have or they will be experiencing most of their formal educational experiences in exile. So I wanted to describe Kakuma through the eyes and words of refugee youth to really sort of ground us. And so this question was actually posed by one of the youth researchers to another in the context of the work that I'm going to share. So one of the young people asked, how would you describe Kakuma to someone who doesn't know Kakuma? And after hesitating for a moment, Ibrahim said, I would describe a place, a temporary place where someone doesn't know about his future. You are not sure whether you will get out of this place. Noor pointed to a bench and she shared, Kakuma is like this bench. It is for everyone to sit. It is not mine. Nothing here is mine. There are no chairs in Kakuma where only I can sit, where I can make something my own. And Bakri had a sort of a different take. So he explained, Kakuma is not like what people just heard. It has different challenges and also a brighter side. People of Kakuma have their own dreams and live life like the rest of the world. People in Kakuma make families. Within a single month, you may notice more than 10 weddings in one section of the camp. For some people, it is better than where they came from. For others, it is the opposite. So every refugee camp is a little bit different, but some of the common features of situations or settings of encampments. First, they're often remote and isolated spaces. Kakuma actually means nowhere in Kiswahili, which is really telling. The host communities or the local communities that host refugees are often marginalized national populations. So even though they are citizens of the host country, they often share a number of challenges with displaced populations and have a need to access the same kinds of social services. Camps are often in enclosed spaces where the people living there have limited spatial mobility. And if you exit that space, you often leave at your own risk. Refugees living in camps are subjects to what Jeff Crisp has called enforced dependency. The idea that refugees are prevented from developing their human potential because they're forced into these positions of dependency by nature of the structural conditions which impede their movement and hinder access to legal employment and earning potential. So all that said, in this remote context, refugees are accessing the Kenyan curriculum and they're earning educational credentials that are recognized nationally in their host state of Kenya. So this work I'm going to share began in 2015 and it spanned 3 years with a kind of a new chapter beginning now as I try to extend this work from afar. I combined ethnographic methods and a youth participatory action research approach in collaboration with students at one secondary school in Kakuma refugee camp. Students were in Form 3, or the US equivalent of 11th grade when we began. And the idea was that I would be able to see them move through their final years of secondary school so that I could understand something about their everyday experiences in school and the ways that they approach their educational aspirations as they transitioned out of secondary school. At the same time, I facilitated a YPAR collaboration in hopes that as we identified challenges, which in this context we knew would be inevitable, we could think about how to use research to advocate for educational improvements that were meaningful and relevant to the young people living in Kakuma. So there are many ways to approach YPAR. I'm not going to give a full background, but among the guiding principles, the research process is a collaboration with shared decision-making throughout all stages of the process. There's also a guiding assumption that the people embedded in the context under study are actually the experts. And so that experiential knowledge matters and has the most validity. And presumably, there's a kind of move from gathering data and doing research towards collective mobilization. So there's elements of youth empowerment and civic praxis and critical consciousness that are operating here that are sort of key to the process. So our group membership fluctuated over time. In total, 17 members rotated in and out of the group, in addition to one male teacher who facilitated meetings during the months when I was based in the US. I was able to stay in touch with almost everyone who no longer participated in the YPAR collaboration as they opted out or moved around. And by 2017, our team had 7 active members in Kakuma, in addition to the teacher. We also had between 1 and 2 host community members or Kenyan nationals who were part of this work. So early on, one of the shared interests that young people identified was the idea of motivation and non-material support around young people's educational pursuits and aspirations in Kakuma. And this idea of non-material support spanned academic and social supports. So together we posed these research questions. We made decisions together about how to design research instruments. We collected and analyzed data together. And our main source of data was about 30 interviews with community members, mostly young people themselves, all of which were carried out by the youth researchers, either individually or in pairs. And there's also sort of a meta question that's operating here, more from my perspective as an adult outsider, coming from all of my identities. So as a white US citizen, non-refugee academic, facilitating this work, which was how do we support young people in YPAR when we're in a context like this where there are such rigid constraints on young people's capacity to make claims, in part given their legal status as non-citizens. So among the most salient findings from our interviews were that almost everyone we talked to wanted to continue their education after secondary school. And so it was a very clear finding that so many youth shared aspirations for post-secondary education. Now, recognizing that shared aspiration drew attention to the enormous gap between youth aspirations and the opportunity structure, the opportunities available for fulfilling these aspirations. At the time of the study, it was 1% of refugees globally who accessed tertiary education. Today, that number has risen to 3%, but might remain as low as 1% when we look at Kenya or Kakuma specifically. So after secondary school, most Form 4 leavers, most high school graduates sit in the community with nothing to do. And these are young people's words coming from the research report that we circulated. So this is William. He's one of their teachers. He's explaining the frustration that students like him encountered when trying to plan their futures. students who had excelled academically but had few opportunities to access post-secondary education, uncertain prospects for citizenship and mobility, and few opportunities for employment. So he explained to us, you should feel like life is opening after finishing secondary, but you feel restricted. Some people plan for the future, but refugees want the day to end. They're stagnant, not moving, not going forward. The challenges you are facing as a student don't go away once you finish school. Now, after graduating, we're living the same life, only we're not planning anything. When you are a student, you can look ahead to completing school. You have that hope. Once you complete, you realize you cannot make these plans you have. You begin to wonder, is education a waste of time? So William aspired to return to his country of origin in South Sudan, where he hoped to contribute to nation building, the peaceful resolution of conflicts, and the expansion of educational opportunities for citizens. But completing school and facing the scarcity of opportunities to apply that knowledge and skills that he had acquired left William in what he described as a more uncertain and more precarious space than when he was enrolled in school. And then this uncertainty fed back into his understanding of the education system and caused these feelings of betrayal. And so this brings me to our third finding. So as we dug into an analysis of the opportunity structure in Kakuma, we realized that many youth who completed schooling lacked clear information about the kinds of opportunities that were available to them for further education, training, and work. And so coming back to our research questions, these expressions of social and academic support were circulating in Kakuma, but they were often circulating as abstract advice in absence of important contextual information about what opportunities existed and how to access them. And often they were circulating in inequitable ways, so that those with more wealth and status more readily accessed information, and sometimes actually kept these intentionally from those with less wealth and status. So we began articulating this idea of information gaps that existed in the camp. We set out to close these information gaps by compiling a list of education and training programming available for youth, as well as the eligibility criteria, deadlines, and selection rates. And we then carried out another layer of research as we went out and talked to all of the agencies in the camp to understand how these opportunities worked. And we created a web page where we housed this information. So even as we outlined a set of actions that we, these youth with my support, could take, doubts emerged. So for example, we listed the agencies in the camp and the kind of information that we thought would be useful to document and curate in our site. And some of the questions that emerged as we moved towards this new round of data collection were really telling. Questions like, will agencies talk to us? Will they let us into the space to even ask these questions? Do they have the answers to the questions that we're asking? Will we be seen as unappreciative if we ask these questions? And so one day, pretty far into our planning, Kareem, who was a really confident, really outgoing member of our group, said, you know, we are not the kind of people that the organizations will give us the information. And this led to really interesting and important conversations about what it means to ask for information about services and programming as a refugee. And it revealed the belief that they, whose lives and livelihoods were shaped and constrained by these opportunities, should not ask these questions, but someone like me, who was not from Kakuma, could. That somehow I would be more entitled to this information than they would. And I understand the hesitance here as a reflection of the ways that young people have internalized the flux and uncertainty that defines their educational opportunity structure. I also see this as an extension of their relationship to authority figures as established in schools. And here I'm pointing to the everyday civic messages that are conveyed to refugee youth. So not asking questions and not feeling like they could ask these questions was a lived consequence of their lack of agency. And in some ways, it also became a coping strategy for coping with that uncertainty. So over the course of the next few weeks, every youth co-researcher was able to talk to an agency representative, and we were able to collect most, although not all, of the data that we anticipated. And a number of youth researchers were actually praised by agency staff for their interests, rather than what they had feared, which was that they may jeopardize their opportunities with these organizations or be seen as critical and unappreciative. And so here's Kareem again, defining the term information gaps for us sort of towards the end of our process so that we can make sure we really defined it well for readers and our audience. And so he explained, information gaps are when you don't understand how something is happening or why it is that way. You need to set your mind, but sometimes you do not know which are the right questions to ask. So this part of his definition is really focused on a kind of information literacy, where you need to identify, what's the information here to sort of make sense of your situation. And then he added, and maybe you do not know you are a person who can ask these questions. And so Kareem's definition shows us that there are actually these multiple dimensions to the ways that information is acting as a barrier in this context. So first is the scope and substance of the questions aimed at understanding the context and how educational opportunities are distributed and accessed. And the second is this dispositional piece, recognizing who has the power and agency to ask questions. Now, both of these are important dimensions of youth civic agency, particularly for a refugee in this context, where there are at once multiple, overlapping, ambiguous, and at times conflicting duty bearers who are accountable for refugee rights and services. So I want to tie this to Arjun Appadurei's concept of the right to research, which he explains is not frequently seen as a capacity with democratic potential, but in fact, it's such a powerful and essential dimension of citizenship. So he writes, full citizenship today requires the capacity to make strategic inquiries and gain strategic knowledge on a continuous basis. The right to research is critical to the exercise of citizenship, or the pursuit of it, for those who are not full citizens. So young people here enacted their right to research by claiming the right to inquire, measure, document, create, disseminate, and challenge, and act on information. I wanted to give you just a little snapshot of what some of the features on the site look like, which I'm now working on with youth remotely, on both expanding what this website intends to do, but also documenting the impact of something like this, which aims to connect young people to opportunities and connect young people to other young people. So designing a shared resource by, for, and with Kakuma youth, we illustrate that young people, even those lacking legal citizenship status, have the rights and means to access information on which their everyday well-being and future livelihoods depend. And when I think about where we began and the ways that young people subsequently took control of this process, I think that what we did was radical. Our collaboration supported young people in claiming their right to research their community and to understand how access to information was empowering, just as a lack of information was impeding their sense of agency and impeding their ability to plan and advocate for themselves. Yet I also found that this collaboration did not make any of the youth researchers want these opportunities any less for themselves. And so a more critical understanding of the structure did not necessarily lead to desires to transform it, though certainly a greater sense of the knowledge and skills needed to navigate it. And so I want to argue that youth researchers did develop a critique of the selectivity of opportunity structures. And beyond access to information, they began to make tentative claims on the global community that they deserved more equitable access to educational opportunities, particularly at the secondary and post-secondary levels. Yet even as they began to complicate their understanding of how opportunities were distributed, they reasserted the logic of meritocracy, rationalizing that systems benefiting a few to the exclusion of the vast majority were reasonable and just in a context like Kakuma. So to my surprise, youth researchers did not advocate for a more inclusive system that would better serve refugees as a group. In some ways, they actually used the tools of white power to uphold their potential fulfillment of individual aspirations within a ranked system of schooling, and to reproduce meritocratic scripts around individual hard work being rewarded with opportunities, regardless of the structural conditions. And so I want to end with this point of dissonance and provocation and invite you all to think with me here, rather than end on a point of clarity and finality, because I think it would be really fruitful for us to think about the relationship between transformative education and democratic citizenship, and ask ourselves what we mean by transformation and what it is that we're seeking to transform. So I'm really looking forward to having that discussion with you, David, Daniel, Tara, and other members of our community. Thank you.